The Varieties of Religious Experience, A Study in Human Nature by William James. The Religion of Healthymindedness is lectures 4 and 5, and I don't know where they divide. The optimistic ideal of duty forbids us to pay it the compliment even of explicit attention. Of course, as our next lectures will show us, this is a bad speculative omission, but it is intimately linked with the practical merits of the system we are examining. Why regret a philosophy of evil? A mind-curer would ask us, if I can put you in possession of a life of good. After all, it is the life that tells, and Mind-Cure has developed a living system of mental hygiene which may well claim to have thrown all previous literature of the Dietetic der Seele into the shade. This system is wholly and exclusively compacted of optimism. Pessimism leads to weakness. Optimism leads to power. Thoughts are things, as one of the most vigorous mind-cure writers prints in bold type at the bottom of each of his pages, and if your thoughts are of health, youth, vigor, and success, before you know it, these things will also be your outward portion. No one can fail of the regenerative influence of the optimistic thinking pertinaciously pursued. Every man owns indefeasibly this inlet to the divine. Fear, on the contrary, and all the contracted and egoistic modes of thought are inlets to destruction. Most mind-curers here bring in a doctrine that thoughts are forces, and that by virtue of a law that like attracts like, one man's thoughts draw to themselves as allies all over thoughts of the same character that exist the world over. Thus one gets, by one's thinking, reinforcements from elsewhere for the realization of one's desires, and the greatest point in the conduct of life is to get the heavenly forces on one's side by opening one's own mind to their influx. On the whole, one is struck by a psychological similarity between the mind cure movement and the Lutheran and Wesleyan movements. To the believer in moralism and works, with his anxious query, "What shall I do to be saved?" Luther and Wesley replied, "You are saved now if you would but believe it." And the mind curers come with precisely similar words of emancipation. They speak, it is true, to persons for whom the conception of salvation has lost its ancient theological meaning, but who nevertheless labor with the same eternal human difficulty. Things are wrong with them. What shall I do to be clear, right, sound, whole, well? It's the form of their question, and the answer is, you are well, sound, and clear already, if you didn't but know it. The whole matter may be summed up in one sentence, says one of the authors whom I have already quoted. God is well, and so are you. You must awaken to the knowledge of your real being, the adequacy of their message to the mental needs of a large fraction of mankind is what gave force to those earlier Gospels. Exactly the same adequacy holds in the case of the mind cure message, foolish as it may sound upon the surface, and seeing its rapid growth in influence and its therapeutic triumphs, one is tempted to ask whether it may not be destined, probably by the very reason of the crudity and extravagance of many of its manifestations, to play a part almost as great in the evolution of the popular religion of the future as did those earlier movements in their day. It remains to be seen whether the school of Mr. Dresser, which assumes more and more the form of mind-cure experience and academic philosophy, mutually impregnating each other, will score the practical triumphs of the less critical and rational sects. But I here fear that I may begin to jar upon the nerves of some of the members of this academic audience. Such contemporary vagaries, you may think, should hardly take so large a place in dignified Gifford lectures. I can only beseech you to have patience. The whole outcome of these lectures will, I imagine, be the emphasizing to your mind of the enormous diversities which the spiritual lives of different men exhibit. Their wants, their susceptibilities, and their capacities all vary and must be classed under different heads. The result is that we have really different types of religious experience, and seeking in these lectures closer acquaintance with the healthy minded type, we must take it where we find it most in most radical form. The psychology of individual types of character has already begun, even to be sketched as yet. Our lectures may our lectures may possibly serve as a crumb-like contribution to the structure. The first thing to bear in mind, especially if we ourselves belong to the clerico-academic scientific type, the official and conventionally correct type, the deadly respectable type, for which to ignore others is a besetting temptation, is that nothing can be more stupid than to bar out phenomena from our notice, merely because we are incapable of taking part in anything like them ourselves. Now, the history of Lutheran salvation by faith, of Methodistic conversions, and of what I call the mind cure movement seems to prove the existence of numerous persons in whom, at any rate, at a certain stage in their development, a change of character for the better, so far from being facilitated by the rules laid down by official moralists, will take place, all the more successfully if those rules be exactly reversed. Official moralists advise us never to relax our strenuousness. Be vigilant day and night, they adjure us. Hold your passive tendencies in check. Shrink from no effort. Keep your will like a bow always bent. But the persons I speak of find that all this conscious effort leads to nothing but failure and vexation in their hands, and only makes them twofold more the children of hell they were before. And you need to address more than your control system, but your reward system isn't enough by itself either. The tense and voluntary attitude becomes in them an impossible fever and torment. Their machinery refuses to run at all when the bearings are made so hot and the belts so tight. Under these circumstances, the way to success, as vouched for by innumerable authentic personal narrations, is by anti-moralistic method, by the surrender of which I spoke in my second lecture. Passivity, not activity, relaxation, not intentness, should be now the rule. Give up the feeling of responsibility, let go your hold, resign the care of your destiny to higher powers, be genuinely indifferent as to what becomes of it all, and you will find not only that you gain a perfect inward relief, but often in addition the particular goods you sincerely thought you were renouncing. This is the salvation through self-despair, the dying to be truly born of Lutheran theology, the passage into nothing of which Jacob Bethman writes. To get it, a critical point must usually be passed, a corner turned within one, something must give way, a native hardness must break down and liquefy. And this event, as we shall abundantly see hereafter, is frequently sudden and automatic, and leaves on the subject an impression that he has been wrought on by an external power. Whatever its ultimate significance may prove to be, this is certainly one fundamental form of human experience. Some say that the capacity or incapacity for it is what divides the religious from the merely moralistic character. With those who undergo it in its fullness, no criticism avails to cast doubt on its reality. They know, for they have actually felt the higher powers in giving up the tension of their personal will. A story which revivalist preachers often tell is that of a man who found himself at night slipping down the side of a precipice. At last he caught a branch which stopped his fall and remained clinging to it in misery for hours, but finally his fingers had to loose their hold, and with a despairing farewell to life he let himself drop. He fell just 6 inches. If he had given up the struggle earlier, his agony would have been spared. As the Mother Earth received him, so, the preachers tell us, will the everlasting arms receive us if we confide absolutely in them and give up the hereditary habit of relying on our personal strength with its precautions that cannot shelter and safeguards that never save. The mind curers had given the widest slope to this sort of experience. They have demonstrated that a form of regeneration by relaxing, by letting go, psychologically indistinguishable from the Lutheran justification by faith and the Wesleyan acceptance of free grace, is within the reach of persons who have no conviction of sin and care nothing for the Lutheran theology. It is but giving your little private convulsive self a rest, and finding that a greater self is there. The results, slow or sudden, or great or small, of combined optimism and expectancy, the regenerative phenomena which ensue on the abandonment of effort, remain firm facts of human nature, no matter whether we adopt a theistic or pantheistic, idealistic, or medical, materialistic view of their ultimate causal explanation. The theistic explanation is by divine grace, which creates a new nature within one, the moment the old nature is sincerely given up. The pantheistic explanation, which is that of most mind cures, is by the merging of the narrower private self into the wider or greater self, the spirit of the universe, which is your own subconscious self. The moment the isolating bearers of mistrust and anxiety are removed, the medico-materialistic explanation is that simpler cerebral processes act more freely, where they are left to act automatically by the shunting out of physiologically, though in this instance not spiritually, higher ones, which, seeking to regulate, only succeed in inhibiting results. Whether this third explanation might, in a psychophysical account of the universe, be combined with either the other or the others, may be left an open question here. When we take up the phenomena of revivalistic conversion, we shall learn something more about all this. Meanwhile, I will say a brief word about the mind curer's methods. They are, of course, largely suggestive. The suggestive influence of environment plays an enormous part in all spiritual education, but the word suggestion, having acquired official status, is unfortunately already beginning to play, in many quarters, the part of a wet blanket upon investigation, being used to fend off all inquiry into the varying susceptibilities of individual cases. Suggestion is only another name for the power of ideas, so far as they prove efficacious over belief and conduct. Ideas efficacious over some people who prove inefficacious over others. Ideas efficacious at some times and in some human surroundings are not so at other times and elsewhere. The ideas of Christian churches are not efficacious in the therapeutic direction today, whatever they may have been in earlier centuries. And when the whole question is as to why the salt has lost its savor here or gained it there, the mere blank waving of the word suggestion as if it were a banner gives no light. Now, as much as none of these people are all wrong or anything like that, I'm not claiming that, a lot of the super fluffy feel-good preachers, there's a reason why their congregations really aren't full all the time. Like, we get the perception, with the camera angles. And it turns out almost all the seats are empty, just a few rows here and a couple rows over there. Is because, to be therapeutic, you need to address the problems rather than just, throw something on top, right? Dr. Goddard, whose candid psychological essay on faith cures ascribes them to nothing but ordinary suggestion, concludes by saying that religion, and by this he seems to mean our popular Christianity, has in it all there is in mental therapeutics, and has it in its best form. Living up to our religious ideas will do anything for us that can be done, and this in spite of the actual fact that the popular Christianity does absolutely nothing or did nothing until the mind cure came to the rescue. An idea to be suggestive must come to the individual with the force of a revelation. The mind cure with its gospel of healthy-mindedness has come as a revelation to many whose hearts the church, Christianity, had left hardened. It has let loose their springs of higher life. Within the churches, a disposition has always prevailed to regard sickness as a visitation, something sent by God for our good, either as chastisement, as a warning, or as an opportunity for exercising virtue, and in the Catholic Church of earning merit. And Islam kind of combines all of those in saying that hardship, as long as you're not abusing yourself, is, can be a means to atone, and at the same time merit and, patience, consistency, sabr. Illness, says a good Catholic writer, P. The June Introduction à la Vie Mystique, 1899, page 218, says, is the most excellent of corporeal mortifications, the mortification which one has not oneself chosen, which is imposed directly by God, and is the direct expression of his will. If other mortifications are of silver, Gay says, this one is of gold, since, although it comes of ourselves, coming as it does of original sin, still on the greater side, as coming, like all that happens, from the providence of God, it is of divine manufacture. Now, where's the even biblical justification for this idea that you're born into sin stuff? Well, yeah, I don't think that, because that's how it works. That's one place where Islam differs. Until you reach the age of accountability, and by age of accountability I mean puberty with full sanity, you're innocent. There is no sin for you. And just are its blows, and how efficacious it is. I do not hesitate to say that patience in a long illness is mortification's very masterpiece, and consequently the triumph of mortified souls. According to this view, a disease should in any case be submissively accepted, and it might under certain circumstances even be blasphemous to wish it away. Okay, that's another difference with Islam. Islam says that you can seek a cure through the lawful and wholesome and all that. And if you need to do something to survive, even that's off the table as something, actually do it to survive. Not, well, I'd feel better if I do. No. The 5 things you're not supposed to consume, go ahead if that's all there is and you're going to die or waste away or something without it. And otherwise, you can pray. You can pray to get better. It's, certainly, because ease and hardship in themselves aren't exactly the virtue. Of course, there have been exceptions to this, and cures by special miracle that have at all times been recognized within the Church's pale, almost all the great saints having more or less performed them. It was one of the heresies of Edward Irving to maintain them still to be possible. Well, if you can accomplish the same thing with ease, certainly seek out doing it through ease. An extremely pure faculty of healing after confession and conversion on the patient's part and prayer on the priest's was quite spontaneously developed in the German pastor John Christoph Blumhardt in the early 40s and exerted during the nearly 30 years. Blumhardt's life by Zundel, 5th edition, Zurich, 1887, gives in chapters 9, 10, and 11, and 17, a pretty full account of his healing activity, which he invariably ascribed to direct divine interposition. Blumhardt was a singularly pure, simple, and non-fanatical character, and in this part of his work followed no previous model. In Chicago today, we have the case of Dr. J. A. Dowie, a Scottish Baptist preacher, whose weekly Leaves of Healing were, in the year of grace 1900, in their 6th volume, who, although he denounces the cures wrought in other sects as diabolical counterfeits of his own exclusively Divine healing must, on the whole, be counted into the mind cure movement. In mind cure circles, the fundamental article of faith is that disease should never be accepted. It is wholly of the pit. God wants us to be absolutely healthy, and we should not tolerate ourselves on any lower terms. Well, you can strive for health without going too far there, right? In what can the originality of any religious movement consist, save in finding a channel, until then sealed up, through which those springs may be set free in some group of human beings? The force of personal faith, enthusiasm, and example, and above all the force of nobility, are always the prime suggestive agency in this kind of success. If mind cure should ever become official, respectable, and entrenched, these elements of suggestive efficacy will be lost. In its acuter stages, every religion must be a homeless Arab of the desert. Well, he means they have their tents or something, right? The Church knows this well enough, with its everlasting inner struggle of the acute religion of the few against the chronic religion of the many, indurated into an obstructiveness worse than that which irreligion opposes to the movings of the Spirit. We may pray, says Jonathan Edwards, concerning all those saints that are not lively Christians, that they may either be enlivened or taken away. If that be true, that is often said by some at this day, that those cold dead saints do more hurt than natural men, and lead more souls to hell, and that it would be well for mankind if they were all dead. Edwards, from whose book on the revival of New England, quote these words, dissuades from such a use of prayer, but it is easy to see that he enjoys making his thrust at the cold dead church members. Well, ideally, the saintly people are natural people, not ones that have opposed nature, but kind of the Bible kind of does get in that area, doesn't it? The next condition of success is the apparent existence in large numbers of minds who unite healthy-mindedness with readiness for regeneration by letting go. Protestantism has been too pessimistic as regards the natural man. Catholicism has been too legalistic and moralistic for either one or the other to appeal in any generous way to the type of character formed of this peculiar mingling of elements. However few of us here present may belong to such a type, it is now evident that it forms a specific moral combination well represented in the world. Now, one can be very much in accord with the rules and the spirit and all that sort of stuff, and combine them. It's just not necessarily how it's presented to you that you should combine them. Finally, mind cure has been made what in our Protestant countries is an unprecedentedly great use of the subconscious life to their reasoned advice and dogmatic assertion. Its founders have added systematic exercise and passive relaxation, concentration, and meditation, and have even invoked something like hypnotic practice. I quote some passages at random, the first of which is from H.W. Dresser, Voices of Freedom, number 46. And before I get into that, isn't it the case that we have, if you actually look at the Bible, prayer wasn't just something, you think or you feel, you think or you say something. No, there's not as much as other traditions, but you definitely had bowing and prostrating and some other stuff. And the rules weren't just, here's a list of 613 rules, right? Yeah, it wasn't legalistic in that way. The value, the potency of ideals is the great practical truth on which New Thought most strongly insists. The development, namely, from within, outward, from the small to the great. Consequently, one's thought should be centered on the ideal outcome, even though this trust be literally like a step in the dark. To attain the ability thus effectively to direct the mind, the New Thought advises the practice of concentration, or in other words, the attainment of self-control. One is to learn to marshal the tendencies of the mind so that they may be held together as a unit of the chosen ideal. To this end, one should set apart times for silent meditation, by oneself, preferably in a room where the surroundings are favorable to spiritual thought. In New Thought terms, this is called entering the silence. And so we had two quotes from Dresser, Living by the Spirit, page 58, and then Voices of Freedom, page 33. And then we're going to get into Trines in Tune with the Infinite, page 214. The time will come when, in the busy office or in the noisy street, you can enter into the silence by simply drawing the mantle of your own thoughts about you and realizing that there and everywhere the spirit of infinite life, love, wisdom, peace, power, and plenty is guiding, keeping, protecting, leading you. This is the spirit of continual prayer, one of the most intuitive men we may ever meet had a desk at a city office where several other gentlemen were doing business constantly and often talking loudly. You know, it's best to talk in the volume where you're heard, entirely undisturbed by the many various sounds about him. This self-controlled, faithful man would, in any moment of perplexity, draw the curtains of privacy so completely about him that he would be as fully enclosed in his own psychic aura, and thereby as effectually removed from all distractions as though he were alone in some primeval wood, taking his difficulty with him into the mystic silence in the form of a direct question to which he expected a certain answer. He would remain utterly passive until the reply came, and never once, through many years' experience, did he find himself disappointed or misled. And Trine, page 117, there, of the same. Wherein, I should like to know, does this intrinsically differ from the practice of the recollection which plays so great a part in Catholic discipline, otherwise called the practice of the presence of God? I did a ritual in my live ritual section there, and so known among ourselves. As for instance, in Jeremy Taylor, it is thus defined by the eminent teacher Alvarez de Paz in his work on contemplation, quoted by Le Jeune, Introduction à la Vie Mystique, 1899, page 66. It is the recollection of God, the thought of God, which in all places and circumstances makes us see him present, lets us commune respectively and lovingly with him, and fills us with desire and affection for him. Would you escape from every ill? Never lose this recollection of God, neither in prosperity nor in adversity, nor on any occasion whichsoever it be. Invoke not to excuse yourself from this duty, either in the difficulty or in the importance of your business, for you can always remember that God sees you, that you are under his eye. If 1,000 times an hour you forget him, reanimate 1,000 times the recollection. If you cannot practice this exercise continuously, at least make yourself as familiar with it as possible, and like unto those who, in a rigorous winter, draw near the fire as often as they can, go as often as you can to that ardent fire which will warm your soul. All the external associations of Catholic discipline are, of course, unlike anything in mind-cure thought, but the purely spiritual part of the exercise is identical in both communions, and in both communions, those who urge it write with authority, for they have evidently experienced in their own persons that whereof they tell. Compare again some mind-cure utterances, and the Henry Wood, Ideal Suggestion Through Mental Photography, page 51 and 70, abridged. High, healthful, pure thinking can be encouraged, promoted, and strengthened Its current can be turned upon grand ideals until it forms a habit and wears a channel. By means of such discipline, the mental horizon can be flooded with the sunshine of beauty, wholeness, and harmony. To inaugurate pure and lofty thinking may at first seem difficult, even almost mechanical, but perseverance will at length render it easy, then pleasant, and finally delightful. The soul's real world is that which it has built of its thoughts, mental states, and imaginations. If we will, we can turn our backs upon the lower and sensuous plane and lift ourselves into the realm of spiritual and real, and there gain a residence. The assumption of states of expectancy and receptivity will attract spiritual sunshine, and it will flow in as naturally as air inclines to a vacuum. Whenever the thought is not accompanied with one's daily duty or profession, it should be sent aloft into the spiritual atmosphere. There are quiet leisure moments by day and wakeful hours at night, when this wholesome and delightful exercise may be engaged in to great advantage. If one who has never made any systematic effort to lift and control the thought forces will, for a single month, earnestly pursue the course here suggested, he will be surprised and delighted at the result, and nothing will induce him to go back to careless, aimless, and superficial thinking. At such favorable seasons, the outside world, with all its current of daily events, is barred out, and one goes into the silent sanctuary of the inner temple of soul to commune and aspire. The spiritual hearing becomes delicately sensitive, so that the still small voice is audible. The tumultuous waves of external senses are hushed, and there is a great calm. The ego gradually becomes conscious, and that is face to face. The ego gradually becomes conscious, and that it is face to face with the divine presence, that mighty, healing, loving, fatherly life, which is nearer to us than we are to ourselves. There is soul contact with the parent soul, and an influx of life, love, virtue, health, and happiness from the inexhaustible fountain. And of course, we know very well here that, the you think the motherly side would more get that, but I guess the father tends to have a bigger domain of where he goes about, right? When we reach the subject of mysticism, you will undergo so deep an immersion into these exalted states of consciousness as to be wet all over, if I may so express myself, and the cold shiver of doubt with which this little sprinkling may affect you will have long since passed away. Doubt, I mean, as to whether all such writing be not more abstract talk and rhetoric set down. Poor encourager, less outers. Poor encourager, less outer. I'm not. I never remember to learn how to read French when I'm in a position to learn. aka, I'm in the middle of something and I think, oh, I should learn French. You will then be convinced, I trust, that these states of consciousness of union form a perfectly definite class of experiences of which the soul may occasionally partake, and which certain persons may live by in a deeper sense than they live by anything else with which they have acquaintance. This brings me to a general philosophical reflection which I should like to pass from the subject of healthy mindedness and close a topic which I fear is already too long drawn out. It concerns the relation of all this systematized healthy mindedness and mind cure religion to scientific method and the scientific life. In a latter lecture, I shall have to treat explicitly of the relation of religion to science on the one hand and to the primal savage thought on the other. There are plenty of persons today, scientists or positivists, they are fond of calling themselves, who will tell you that religious thought is a mere survival, an atavistic reversion to a type of consciousness which humanity, in its more enlightened examples, has long since left behind and outgrown. If you ask them to explain themselves more fully, they will probably say that for primitive thought, everything is conceived of under the form of personality. And The savage thinks that things operate by personal forces and for the sake of individual ends. For him, even external nature obeys individual needs and claims, just as if these were so many elementary powers. Now science, on the other hand, these positivists say, has proved that personality, so far from being an elementary force in nature, is but a passive resultant of the really elementary forces, physical, chemical, physiological, and psychophysical, which are all impersonal and general in character. Nothing individual accomplishes anything in the universe, save in so far as it obeys and exemplifies some universal law. Should you then inquire of them by what means science has thus supplanted primitive thought and discredited its personal way of looking at things, they would undoubtedly say it has been by the strict use of the method of experimental verification. Follow out science's conceptions practically, they will say, the conceptions that ignore personality altogether, and you will always be corroborated. The world is so made that all your expectations will be experientially verified so long, and only so long as you keep the terms from which you infer them impersonal and universal. But here we have Mind Cure with her diametrically opposite philosophy, setting up an exactly identical claim. Live as if I were true, she says, and every day will practically prove you right, that the controlling energies of nature are personal, that your own personal thoughts are forces, that the powers of the universe will directly respond to your individual appeals and needs, are propositions which your whole bodily and mental experience will verify, and that experience does largely verify those primeval religious ideas, is proved by the fact that the Mind Cure movement spreads as it does, not by proclamation and assertion, but by palpable experiential results. Here, in the very heyday of science's authority, it carries on an aggressive warfare against the scientific philosophy and succeeds by using science's own peculiar methods and weapons, believing that a higher power will take care of us in certain ways better than we can take care of ourselves if we only genuinely throw ourselves upon it and consent to use it. It finds the belief not only by impugned but corroborated by its observation. I think I will leave that for a fifth program.